Hey guys, Coach Adam from TeamElitePhysique.com. We are doing another Pro Bikini Show review today, and we had a real throwdown this weekend with 3 newly qualified athletes to the Olympia. We had the Battle of the Bodies where there was no surprise. Number 4 ranked Pro Bikini, Daraja Hill, winning the show, getting to the Olympia. Again, no surprise to anyone that she won that show. We had Valeria winning the Europa Pro, which is great. We're going to go over her physique as well. And in Mexico, down south, we had the Grand Battle Mexico where Reina stamped her ticket, getting to the Olympia as well. So there's a lot of shows. We now have 46 bikini athletes qualified for the Olympia. We don't have much time left for the Olympia qualification. We have another show this weekend, the San Antonio Pro. And actually, I've been telling you guys lately that this last part of the year is going to be crazy. You're going to see some big names jumping into shows trying to qualify for the Olympia. But I'm really shocked at seeing this weekend's San Antonio list. You don't have any heavy hitters. You don't have any top 15 Olympia qualified athletes from last year jumping into these shows. I am very surprised. I think that we're going to see someone jump into that show because as of right now, there's no big name, so it's anyone's game. Actually, at this show, I would put Lizzie ahead of the pack as one of the favorites to win it, looking at the lineup here, and that would be awesome if she wouldn't have been talking about her all year. But it's supposed to be an exciting, volatile part of the year where anyone could just jump into these shows, and I think when that list came out earlier today, we might see some people jump into that show that weren't on the list originally. Now, everyone's pretty much qualified that we are all expecting to see being qualified. We have still not yet to see Jordan, and India is not qualified yet either. So those are 2 names that everyone kind of expected to be on the list. I know that Jordan is getting ready to compete, so maybe she'll jump into this show in San Antonio this weekend. I think that Lauren, going into the last show where she got 3rd at the Battle of the Bodies, she's got some momentum now. She went into 3rd. I think that it would be strategic for her to jump into the San Antonio show looking at that lineup as well. And that's what you should be doing at this stage, is looking for the shows. But if a show looks like there's not any heavy hitters and you're a Lauren, you're a Jordan, and you're in shape, like, jump right in because you have a good chance at that show. But that's how the end of this year is supposed to be. We'll see if that's how it's going to be. But let's go ahead and jump into this weekend and see how everyone did. Let's compare them, and let's see how they're going to do at the Olympia and give my thoughts on where they're going to be in the Olympia. So jumping right into the Battle of the Bodies, which was a real throwdown. You had Daraja Hill winning the show. No surprise there. She's the number 4th ranked bikini pro in the world. Coming in second is Jessica Delias, which was a surprise. Not that she got second, though it was a little bit of a surprise she got second. It wasn't like out of the question that she got second. It was just how she got second, right? It was a real throwdown. They were doing top 2 callbacks, and it looks like they were switching up top 2 callbacks. The judges had a real hard time with this, and I understand why they had a hard time with it. I would have had a hard time with it too, to be honest. It's not so cut and dry. Second place was only second place by 1 point, right? Now, Jessica isn't some heavy hitter yet, right? I think she could be eventually, but she's not right now. She's not some heavy hitter that's coming in and is like, oh, I'm top 10 at the Olympia. I'm an experienced competitor. I've won 10 pro shows. It's not the scenario. She's not qualified for the Olympia even right now. So to lose by only 1 point to Daraja, who's number 4th ranked competitor, that says that either Jessica is just crazy, crazy good, or that Daraja was just crazy, crazy off, right? So which one was it? Well, in this one, I do think Daraja was off. She came in a little bit soft. She wasn't her best at this show, but it was still enough to win. But though some judges thought she was too soft and didn't have her winning. Now, this is something that Daraja does in her first show back. It's just kind of something that happens with her. Sometimes she'll come in perfectly on point. Sometimes she'll be a little bit soft. If you remember last year, she was a little bit soft and she went up against Phoebe Hagen right before the Olympia. We're talking, it was either 1 or 2 weeks before the Olympia, and Phoebe beat her at the Texas show just a couple weeks before the Olympia, right? So after that, she tightened up. She gave it her all. I talked to her coach. She's like, yep, she's been grinding these last 2 weeks, and she moved up to 4th place at the Olympia. So even passing Phoebe Hagen, who got 7th, right? So a lot of times people think in bikini there's momentum, and if you lose to someone that you're going to naturally lose to them a couple weeks later at the Olympia, right? It sets a precedence, right? It doesn't really work that way 100% of the time. It actually doesn't work that way a lot of the time. Usually it's just the best body wins that day. People think a lot of this momentum thing, and I think that's died down a little bit. I don't really think that that's the case anymore, and that's a great example of it. Phoebe beat her just a couple weeks earlier and then gets 7th at the Olympia, loses to her at the Olympia, right? So I don't think that matters. It just comes down to what your body looks like that day. Now, I will say Daraja was a little bit off this weekend. Her stomach was a little bit blown out, right? When you have, it just needed a little bit of tightening. It was probably the widest waist in the top 5 at that show, which was saying a lot because that's a smaller show. And from the back, her glutes really needed a lot more conditioning. Now, her lines and her shape carry her through winning that show. Her overall muscle. She was the most muscular, most balanced competitor there still, though, out of that top 5. But her conditioning was the only thing that was off. So the judges had a hard time. Do we award someone who's out not the right conditioning, even though everything else is better? Is that how we're going to judge this one? And it looks like it was a real close battle. And that's really what they went with. But this is not the best Daraja. This is not the Daraja you're going to see at the Olympia. I expect her to be a lot better, especially because she's competing far out from the Olympia. I mean, we're talking here. We got quite a bit of time before the Olympia, and she just needed to qualify. So this is kind of one of those shows I think she jumped into. It's like, I just need to qualify. I'm in pretty good shape. I'm 90%. And I do think this is her at 90%. This is not anywhere near 100%. I might throw a bikini competitor into a show, 95, 96%, something like that. If you have someone who competes a lot, you could take like an Ashley Cotwalser. She competes, sometimes 10 times a year. She's not going to be 100% every time she competes. But she's not going to be 90% either. We're shooting for 95%. At our worst, we're shooting for like a 94, right? And we're like, maybe not even do that show if you're like a 94. So hats off to Daraja for going with it, knowing that she's not 100%. She's at 90%, saying, hey, I just need to qualify. I know I'm good enough to qualify. I mean, that takes some guts, right? To do that. Who really would do that? And I know she knows that she's not 100%. You can see it, especially in the back pose. But let's go ahead and see why. When we break it down, when we look at her, you could see the waistline. For her, that is a soft waistline. That is a thicker core. It's a rounder core too. You could just see that it's just not conditioned yet. It just needs a lot more conditioning for her at the Olympia level. Now, when we look at Jessica is right on point, fully conditioned. You look at Lauren, flat stomach, fully conditioned. And these girls are all full, but still have that tight stomach because that's what you need. You need a small waistline. You need those good lines. You need that tight conditioning in today's bikini. Daraja, the reason that she's winning is because her fullness and her shape is just so good. Her roundness, her skin tone, her complexion, how she shines on stage. It's a whole package thing, and that's bikini. You can be a little bit soft, and that can offset everything. And a lot of people are wondering, why didn't Jessica win? I mean, Daraja is clearly not in the best shape that she could be in. How come Jessica doesn't win? Is it just because of her name? And I'm like, no, it's not just because of her name. It's because her total package is still better than Jessica's. Her posing routine, her how she shines on stage, like her skin texture, the fullness of her physique. Everywhere on her body looks absolutely amazing. Besides, her core is a little bit wide right now. It's a little blown out, just a little bit rounder at the top range where I showed you here, where you just see where it should be a little flatter. And then on the glute shot where the glutes are a little bit soft, but everything else is still there. So do you not give her a first place, even though she's so much better than everyone else besides those two things? It's a hard argument. Me personally, I will go with the conditioning first. So I would have had Jessica winning this show. Some of the judges did have Jessica winning this show. That's why she only lost by 1 point. I would have awarded the conditioning because I think that that's the harder thing to do, is have that conditioning and having that than having just, your genetic shape. So I would have awarded that in this scenario, but the other judges, they went with Daraja. And I think that there's no wrong decision there. It's kind of one of those really hard to make decisions. And that's why there was so many top callbacks. So there was top 2 callbacks. There was one with Daraja. There was one with Lauren and Jessica. It looked like a top 2 callback, but apparently they were kind of trying to figure out if Lauren was going to take second. I don't know what the scenario was on that. It could have been they were comparing them for first and second at that point. You don't know, so it was a really tough show for the judges. So hats off to the judges. I think they got it right. I think if Jessica would have won, they would have got it right too. I think both of those are the right decision for different reasoning. So looking at Lauren, great shape, great flow on stage, probably the best posing routine out of these 3. She's so good on stage. She's just really, really good on stage with her posing. Now, but the thing with Lauren, she still needs a lot more muscle, and it's unfortunate because in this scenario, this is probably one of the better scenarios she's going to run into to actually win the show against this level of competition. But she's just outside. She needs more overall shoulders. Her lines are great. Her texture is great of her skin. The flow is really great with her conditioning. But yeah, she just still needs more overall size. So let's go ahead and go to the back where we're really going to see the differences on the back. And the argument gets stronger for Jessica winning on the backside. So looking at them from the back, this is where the argument comes in: conditioning versus overall shape. And I could see why the judges had a hard time. So looking at Jessica from the back, Jessica is in great condition. And where we can see the conditioning really stand out is in where the glutes are, right? So in the middle area of the glutes, this area here is where you're going to see where the conditioning really is, right? That last little bit of body fat is the hardest area for the body fat to go away from on women. Women generally store body fat in their hips, their legs, and their triceps, right? That's going to be the hardest parts to really lean out. You're not going to ever judge someone on the fat of their triceps, but you're going to judge it on their glutes and on their tie-ins, right? That's where the last bit of fat is going to be. When we talk about, draining a pool, this is Ashley's thing. She says, if you're draining a pool, you can't get to the last bit of water first that's closest to the drain. This is like body fat on the glutes. You're going to have to drain the entire pool, get rid of all the body fat, and then at the end, you'll get that last bit of water, that last bit of body fat. So that's when you're going to tell if someone's conditioned or not, if they've been putting in the work, is if their conditioning comes in. And this is where Daraja is a little bit off. So if you're looking at the glutes closely, you could see the glutes are actually a little bit soft, and they're actually touching like around the suit. And that's like a tell sign, especially in a walk. When someone's walking, you're going to really see that. When the glutes are kind of reaching around the suit and touching, you're just a little bit off on conditioning. She needs a couple more weeks of dieting to get those glutes into top shape. Probably 2 to 3 weeks of hard dieting and cardio, and you can get those glutes into top shape. But remember, she just needed to get qualified for the Olympia. And so it makes sense why she's competing a little bit early. She knows that she's not 100% in condition. No one goes into a show like these top-level athletes. She's number 4 in the world. They know, hey, I'm a little bit off on my conditioning, but I'm not way off on my conditioning. This should be enough to get me qualified for the Olympia. And she was right. She did. Now, it was really, really close, a little too close for comfort. She's only winning by 1 point to someone who's not a top 15 Olympian. This is not someone who's, she's not competing against Jennifer Dory and winning by 1 point. She's competing against Jessica, who's not qualified for the Olympia yet and is not a top 15 Olympian or anything like that, and only winning by 1 point. So it does show you how far off she was. And it also shows you how fair the judging is too, because you would think someone who's top 4 in an Olympia can come in at 90% and just win every show. That's not the case. It comes down to who's the best that day. So I say hats off to the judging on this one. This is a tough one. Earlier I said I would actually have Jessica beating Daraja. I went back and forth in these pictures making this video, and it came down to me. I actually looked at it. I was like, you know what? I don't think I would. Even though she was a lot softer and conditioning is such an important part of bikini, her shape is just so much better than Jessica's that I understand why the judges had a hard time with this, because I've been going back and forth on this too. So that's why it's a 1 point decision. This is how tough bikini is. But when we look at the overall structure of Daraja, that's what carries her in this contest. Now, if her structure was the same as Jessica's and she was in the same conditioning here, even if she had more muscle, I would have given it to Jessica, no problem. But we have to take shape into account. At this level, your structure does matter. And when we look at Daraja, this is what is really good on Daraja. Now, Daraja has a wider waistline, right? I talked about that. In the top 15, she probably has the widest waistline in the top 15. Does it matter though, right? Does it matter? And obviously with her placing top 4, it doesn't matter, right? And this is the thing people don't understand. Yeah, if you look at Daraja and you're just talking to her and she's maybe doing a walk back, the only time her waist is exposed is when she's walking from the back to the front. That's the only time her waistline is exposed. In that front pose, she's hitting a profile shot, so her waistline's not exposed. In the back pose, you could see she's got her hair is nice and wide. It's kind of exposed here, but she's got these crazy ratios of her shoulders. She's got that wide clavicle width, and she's got that really wide hip width, which makes her waistline look smaller. Now, judges aren't running on stage saying, hey, what is her waistline measurement with a measuring tape? So it doesn't matter that much. Like everyone thinks it matters so much. It doesn't matter that much. What matters is the ratios and the illusion of a small waist. She creates a very good illusion of a small waist. Her hair is strategically that wide. Her shoulders are strategically pushed that wide. Her hips strategically have grown and created more width. She's posing strategically that way with a big arch in her back to make her waistline farther away from her glutes, so her waistline looks smaller, right? This is all pro bikini. You can't do anything about your structure. You just try to hide your weaknesses and show your strengths. That's what you do in bikini, and she's doing a very good job of it. But one thing she can't hide this weekend was the conditioning of her glutes. Her glutes were just very soft. Her legs were a little bit soft. Her tie-ins aren't fully where they where they need to be at the upper levels, but this is not going to be the Olympia level Daraja that we're wanting to see. This is her walking into a show saying, all right, I'm 90%. I need to qualify for the Olympia. Maybe it'll take one show. Maybe it'll take 3 shows. I'm just going to start ramping up, getting ready for the Olympia. I'm going to jump into shows, and I'm going to hopefully win a couple of these shows and get my Olympia qualification along the way, creating some momentum along the way. So looking at Daraja from the back, conditioning-wise, she loses. There's no doubt about it. Out of these 3, out of Lauren, Jessica, and Daraja is 3rd in conditioning. Let's not give her that. That's just the reality of things. I'm not going to deny that. But in terms of shape, she's number 1. In terms of muscle fullness, she's number 1. In terms of overall presentation, she's probably 1 and 2 with Lauren, really close. Texture, skin texture, complexion, lines, ratios, probably 1 or 2 in all of those. Top 3 in all of those. Total package, hair, makeup, all that, it's perfect, right? So when you add all those up, does the conditioning, does it really matter that much more than everything else being best? Probably not. I think the judges got this one right. First, when I was seeing pictures, I was like, man, she is really soft. Her core looks really blown out. Like maybe she just didn't hit her conditioning, or maybe they carved her up really heavy. I don't know the scenario there, but her waistline was wider than normal. I think it was just body fat, honestly. And then seeing her conditioning in the back, I'm like, man, she might lose this show. And I was even saying at one point, I'm like, this is surprising. Out of the top 3, I probably would have had Lauren maybe even winning this show or getting 2nd in this show, worst case scenario, and 3rd with Daraja, looking at her conditioning. And then I started looking closer and closer and playing with these pictures back and forth. And I was like, you know what? I think I would have had Daraja too. Might have taken a lot for me to get there. It's taken me a lot to get there. Usually I could see it right away. And I could see why it was a 1-point decision, because the judges had a really hard time. At this show, they were doing top 2 callbacks with different people. I think that at one point, Daraja was actually losing at one point, and wasn't even in the top 2, because they did a top 2 callback with Lauren and Jessica. That could have been a battle for 2nd place, but they don't usually do a top 2 callback like that if someone is clearly the winner. Usually they'll do a top 3 callback, push number 1 out to the edge, and then compare top 2 that way. But this show, it had Daraja and Jessica as a top 2 callback. It had Lauren and Jessica as a top 2 callback. There was a point where it looked like Jessica was winning this show. It might have been, and they might have had some real discussions with it. That's how hard Bikini is, because it's such a total package thing. It's really difficult to decide some of these tough ones. So hats off to the judges. Originally, yes, I thought they got it wrong. I thought that Daraja needed to be a little bit better conditioned to get her Olympia qualification. Looking at it closely, honestly, I don't see a way she loses, which is her shape. Her shape is just so damn good. So this is not the best Daraja. This is 90% Daraja. Hats off to them and their team walking into a show at 90% and winning it. I mean, that takes some real guts, being like, hey, you're off right now, but we're still going to do this show. I mean, I'll throw people in like 95% if they're doing a lot of shows. I'm like, they're a little off, but they're good enough right now to maybe win this show. If they compete a lot, if you have someone, let's say like an Ashley Cotwalser who competes 10 times a year, she's not going to be 100% Olympia level every time. That's crazy to ask of that, right? So, but 90%, not going to be throwing her in shows at 90%. She wouldn't jump in it. She would be like, Adam, no way I'm jumping in this show at 90%. So hats off to them for doing that. I don't know. It's a good thing or a bad thing. I'm not willing to do it. I'm not throwing them unless they're 95%, no matter who they are. But it got the job done. She's Olympia qualified, so good for them. I think now the pressure of getting qualified is off, and now she just runs into shows, improving from show to show. Now, remember, she did this last year, too, against Phoebe. She got 2nd to Phoebe at Texas just a couple weeks before the Olympia, and it didn't matter. People think that momentum matters so much in bikini. It didn't matter. She lost just, I think it was 1 week, actually, earlier than the Olympia, so everyone went into it thinking, oh, Phoebe's going to beat Daraja at the Olympia, which was entirely possible, but then she ended up tightening up and ended up beating Phoebe at the Olympia. So not like this is going to have any effect on it, but I will say the judges will be looking at her glutes and looking at her core at the Olympia, being like, I remember her at Battle of the Bodies. I wonder if she's tightened up since then. I'm sure they made a mental note of that. So that's going to be one thing that puts her at a little bit of disadvantage. She's going to have to be like, okay, some of the top judges that are going to be at the Olympia saw me. They know that they want me to be a little bit tighter in my waist and a little bit tighter in my glutes. They're going to be looking for it because I put it out there. That's the only downside to it, but that's not a problem because she brought it last year, and I'm sure she'll bring it to the Olympia. This is her at 90%, so it doesn't really matter. So hats off to them. Congrats to Daraja for getting qualified. Now, we had 2 other shows, the Europa and the Mexico show. Let's take a look at the winners, and let's see what they need to improve on to move up in the ranks to the Olympia. So the 2 other winners of this weekend was Valeria at the Europa Pro and Reina at the Mexico Grand Battle. So looking at these two, they both got their tickets to the Olympia. They were not qualified prior. There was not any depth to those shows. There wasn't any heavy hitters going into those shows over there. And you'll see that overseas or in Mexico where you don't have any of the bigger names going to these shows. So looking at them, I wanted to analyze their physique and say, okay, how are they going to do at this year's Olympia? Valeria, we have a good idea already of how she's going to be doing at this year's Olympia based on her prior placings in the U.S. market already. She came out to the U.S. market earlier this year, and she got top 10 in a lot of her shows. She was always someone who was, she was mostly someone in that first call out at all her shows. I think at all her shows she did get a first call out, but she just came a little bit off on her conditioning. The thing about Valeria is her lines are so good. Her beauty is crazy. She looks like a supermodel. Her clavicle width is awesome. Her ratios are really, really good. But the problem with Valeria is her quads always come in over conditioned. She always gets her conditioning way too tight. You can't hide the conditioning when you're doing the walkout. Like when someone is as tall as her, especially, and she comes out and you see her and she comes out and she really is like the light goes right to Valeria. You look at her and you're like, whoa, who's this girl? She's like a fitness model, like full on fitness model. She stops, she hits her pose, everyone's staring at her, right? And then she walks out and you're like, oh, quad separation, quad separation, quad separation, quad separation, feathering of the quads, right? Not even just quad separation, but feathering of the quads. So when we talk about quad separation, a lot of women have quad detail. You're going to see quad detail in a lot of these athletes that have those bigger quads these days. I've referenced back to Amy having some quad detail. Ashlyn had some quad detail this year. Laura Lee, some really muscular quads this year. I imagine she'll probably have some quad detail when she's in full condition for the Olympia. But feathering of the quad is something different. So when we talk about separation of the quad, that's the vertical separation of the quad muscles themselves, where you can see the lines of the quads. Now, the feathering of the quad is actual, like if you looked at a feather, like a bird feather, it is the horizontal striations of the quad. So not just striations of the quad in separation, but full-on feathering striations of the quad. That is pretty crazy when you get that lean. That is some serious conditioning. So that's the thing with Valeria. And you could see here, even in this picture, you're seeing some feathering of the quad. And when you're seeing her in person, you really see that feathering of the quad. When you see her in the back pose, you're seeing that vertical separation of those hamstrings. She comes in way too tight on her legs. And I've said this for a little while. Once she can bring in that right total package, she brings in the right suit, the right jewelry, the right posing, the right conditioning. Like her limits are pretty untouchable. Like she's got some pretty big potential. Now, the question comes down to, is she capable of getting her legs softer and still maintaining that beautiful flow and that beautiful look? I don't know. I don't know if it's a body fat distribution issue or if she's overshooting time and time and time again. Because if you're being rewarded overseas for being super sharp, but then you come out to the US and you're not doing as well, I mean, that should tell you to get softer there, right? But at the Europa, she was just as hard, but there wasn't as much talent at the Europa, so she wins, right? Her winning the Europa is still like her getting 5th or 6th place at the United States shows where there's more talent level, right? So it's unfortunate to reward someone, but who else are you going to reward when everyone else isn't as good as her, right? So it's one of those scenarios. Daraja was a little bit too soft. Valeria is a little bit too hard, but there's no one else to reward. She's still the best one there, even though she's the hardest. So can she bring her conditioning in right? Can she bring in her total package right? There's a lot of little things that she's doing that are wrong that'll make her package way better right away and way more competitive in the American market. The biggest one is the conditioning, but her overall stage look, presentation, how she's posing, all those things need to change for her to be competitive at this year's Olympia. Will she be a student of the game enough to know what those changes need to be? I'm not going to tell them what they are. I'm not going to help someone whose team has had that much potential. I'll give my tips here and there, but full coaching, yeah, it's teamelitephysique.com. Sorry, guys. I only give out so much for free. But there's a lot of little things she can be doing that can make her package way better instantly. And I think a lot of the top coaches talk about it. We talk to each other like, man, why aren't they fixing that? And we're just like, I'm not gonna be the one to tell them. So hopefully she could put it all together and have maybe even a top 10 at this year's Olympia. But the biggest one, the most obvious one, the one she's already heard from the judges is her leg conditioning comes in too tight. Everything else is just so damn good, man. Everything else is so good. Ratios are crazy. Structure is crazy. Beauty is crazy. Flow is crazy, right? Everything is there. It just comes down to those last little things. Now, looking over at Reina at this year's Olympia, I don't think she's going to be a potential top 10 yet. She needs more overall fullness. You could see her quads. They need a little bit more roundness to her quads. you could see her conditioning is crazy conditioning, right? That conditioning is pretty hard on the core. I think that her conditioning is a little bit overshot, not by a ton, but maybe 2 pounds too tight for like an Olympia level conditioning. I think that she'll be a little too hard at that conditioning if she brings that to the Olympia. A couple pounds will do her physique really well. It'll make her look fuller as well. Remember, when you're super tight, you're not going to be as round and big. It's just part of it. It's more space, right? So if you're filling up more space, even if it's body fat, you look bigger, right? You're going to have more roundness and fullness. So I think a couple pounds for her is going to be her best bet going into the Olympia. But let's go ahead and look at the backside and go from there. So looking at Valeria from the back, she is really, really good. Shoulder to waist to hip ratio. She has those long diamond glutes all the way down. Great tie-ins, not too deep, at the perfect spot. Full tie-in without an edge tie-in, but really tight in the conditioning. You're seeing the separation in the hamstrings. You're seeing the vertical separation of those hamstrings. You're seeing the full detail and grooves on the edges of those hamstrings. So you can even see here in the calves, she's getting some cross striations in the calves too. I mean, cross-striated calves. You're seeing the cross striations even in the quads from the back. So that's the thing with her. It's the legs are so sharp. They're just so sharp. She'll look fuller with a little bit softer conditioning. But can she still get the tie-ins to show the way that she needs to show with having that softer conditioning and so much detail? That's what's going to hurt her at an Olympia level show. It's already hurt her in the American market at the shows out here with coming in that tight, with her not being able to get an Olympia qualification until she went back over to Europe, with her competing quite a few times in the American market. So that just shows where she's at right now, and that's the one thing she needs to fix. So I hope she does it, but there is a lot of little things to fix when you're getting to that top level, and it's gonna hold you back. It's gonna hold you back from reaching your potential if you don't fix those things. If you just keep doing it, if you think what's gonna win at the European shows or the shows overseas when there's no talent there, it's not. It's just not what's going to happen. You might be able to win the shows when there's not any top 10 people there, top 20 people there. But once you get to the American market and you're running into those people all the time, it's going to consistently place you lower until you fix those things. But once she fixes those things, I can see her winning a ton of shows in the American market, but she has to fix those things. It is a huge roadblock right now. I think they think over there at their camp that it's close. It's not close. She's very far away in the American market than she is over there in that market where there's a lot less talent, unfortunately, because she's got so much damn potential. Now, looking at Reina from the back, as we talked about, a little bit overshot in the conditioning, right? You're seeing, again, the detail of the hamstrings starting to come in, the vertical separation of those hamstrings coming in, a full etching of those glutes. And she's posing pretty soft here on those glutes, so she can afford to put on a couple pounds and just pose a little harder. And if she poses a little harder, she's still going to have those crazy tie-ins. That shape is pretty impressive. Wide hips, diamond glutes, tiny waistline, great shoulder clavicle width. She's pinching a little bit in her back pose too, so she's actually not even showing her full shoulder width. She's pinching quite a bit. Look at Valeria. Valeria is posing right on her upper shoulder. She's showing the width, which is creating even better ratios. You look at Reina, she's actually pinching off a little bit too much, which is making her look more straight up and down. Her ratios aren't as good as they could be. One, because the fullness isn't there, because she could have a little bit more fullness, a little bit more softness to make her look a little wider. And two, she's pinching really hard in those shoulders, shrinking up her clavicle width and shrinking up her shoulder width, which is going to hurt her. Now, I still think she's going to need more time to fill out her frame to get to the Olympia and get in a top 10. Valeria, however, is just about, does she present the right package? Does she bring the right fullness? And she could get into the top 10. Probably more likely the top 15 if she fixes all those things, but it's possible for her to get into the top 10 if she brings in the perfect conditioning, the perfect flow. I think that it's entirely possible, but there's a lot to fix there, and I'm not positive, but I would love to see her in that top 10. I think that she's got a physique that has potential of even one day winning an Olympia title. Her ratios are so good. It would be great to see a tall girl win that Olympia title. A ton of potential, but right now it's a huge roadblock stopping her. So I hope she watches this. I hope she fixes those things. She's been talking to the judges already in the American market. She knows it's an issue, but she's bringing the same thing again. So anyway, with that, guys, that is what I got for you. Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, TeamElitePhysique.com for worldwide online contest prep with me. Leave your questions in the comments section. I'll be answering them as always throughout the week. Thank you guys so much for tuning in, and I'll talk to you later.